You know that feeling when you are sitting on a ticking time bomb, but you are the only one in the room who knows exactly when it is going to explode? That was me at this year's Christmas dinner. The table was set with the finest china. The crystal glasses were sparkling under the expensive chandelier, and the smell of rosemary roasted lamb was filling the air. It should have been perfect. It should have been one of those Hallmark moments where everyone is laughing and passing the potatoes. But it wasn't. The air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a steak knife. And the center of that tension wasn't the burnt rolls or the political arguments. It was a plate. A single chipped, faded floral plate that I had placed right in front of me. My son-in-law, Mark, was staring at that plate like it was a dead rat I had dragged in from the gutter. His lip was curled in that sneer I had come to know so well over the last 5 years. He took a sip of his expensive red wine, swirled it around the glass, and just kept his eyes locked on my cracked dish. I knew what was coming. I think deep down I had brought that plate on purpose. It was a test. A final exam for a man who had spent half a decade making me feel small. He thought I was just a senile old woman holding on to trash. He thought I was useless. He thought I was a burden on his shiny, successful life. But as I sat there, smoothing the napkin over my lap, I had my hand resting on my purse under the table. Inside that purse was a manila folder that was about to change the geography of his entire world. He just didn't know it yet. Let me back up a second because you need to understand why a cracked plate could cause a nuclear meltdown. My name is Evelyn. I am 65 years old and I have worked hard every single day of my life. I raised my daughter, Sarah, on my own after my husband passed. I worked double shifts at a diner, I scrubbed floors, and I saved every penny I could so she could have a good life. And she did. She grew up smart and beautiful and kind. But then she met Mark. On paper, Mark is a catch. He wears tailored suits. He drives a luxury car. He talks loudly about his investments and his promotions. But beneath that polished exterior is a man who measures people by their net worth. And to him I was worth nothing. This Christmas was supposed to be hosted at his house. That is what he called it. He loved saying my house. He would say, Evelyn, make sure you wipe your feet before you come into my house. Or, Evelyn, don't touch the thermostat in my house. He emphasized the word my like he was planting a flag on the moon. I had moved into the guest cottage on the property about 6 months ago to be closer to the grandkids, Leo and Maya. Mark made it very clear that this was an act of supreme charity on his part. He acted like he was housing a stray dog. He didn't know the truth about the property arrangement, and I had kept my mouth shut for Sarah's sake. I wanted peace. I wanted to be a grandma who baked cookies and read bedtime stories. I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who started World War III. But silence has a price, doesn't it? You pay for it in little pieces of your dignity. Over the months the comments had started. Small at first. He would laugh at my old flip phone. He would mock the way I dressed. Then it got personal. He started making jokes about how I was draining their resources. He would sigh loudly whenever I entered the room. It was this slow, grinding emotional warfare designed to make me feel like I didn't belong. And tonight, on Christmas, he had decided to escalate. We had all sat down for dinner. Sarah looked exhausted. She was trying so hard to keep the peace, rushing around the kitchen, making sure Mark's wine glass was full, making sure the kids were behaving. I could see the stress lines around her eyes. She knew Mark was in a mood. We all knew. Mark sat at the head of the table, leaning back like a king on his throne. He looked at the spread of food and nodded, satisfied. Then his eyes landed on my setting. I had brought my own plate. It was a tradition in my family to eat Christmas dinner off this specific set of china that my grandmother had brought over from Italy. Most of the set was gone now, broken or lost over the years. I had one plate left. It had a hairline crack running down the center and a chip on the rim. But to me it was beautiful. It represented survival. It represented history. I wanted to eat my Christmas dinner off something that meant something to me, not Mark's cold, square, modern plates that cost $50 a piece. What is that? Mark asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter of the kids like a razor. I looked up, feigning innocence. It's my plate, Mark. It's tradition. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It's garbage, Evelyn. You brought garbage to my Christmas table. Look at it. It's cracked. It's unhygienic. It looks like something you'd find in a dumpster. Sarah tried to intervene. Mark, please. It's just a plate. It means a lot to her. It's embarrassing, Sarah, Mark snapped, not even looking at her. We have guests coming over for dessert later. I don't want them seeing my mother-in-law eating off broken trash. It fits the aesthetic though, doesn't it? Broken things for broken people. The room went silent. Even the kids stopped chewing. That was the line. He had crossed it before in private, but never this blatantly in front of the children. My heart started hammering in my chest, not from fear but from a strange mix of anger and adrenaline. He called me broken. He called me trash. Before I tell you exactly what happened next and how this dinner spiraled into absolute chaos, I want to take a quick second to connect with you guys. I love reading through the comments and seeing how far these stories travel. So drop a comment down below right now. Tell me what time it is where you are watching this and let me know what city or country you are in. It is always mind-blowing to see people from all over the world hanging out here. Hey, are you done? Listen, let's get back to Mark digging his own grave. I didn't say anything immediately. I just looked at him. I looked at his expensive watch and his smug face. I slowly picked up my fork and knife. It's a plate, Mark, I said, keeping my voice steady. It holds food just fine. It's been in my family for 80 years. It has value. Mark scoffed, pouring himself more wine. Value? Evelyn, you wouldn't know value if it hit you in the face. You have zero concept of what things are worth. That's why you're in this position. That's why you're sitting here eating my food, living on my land, contributing absolutely nothing. You're useless, Evelyn. Let's just be honest about it. It's Christmas, so let's tell the truth. You are a financial and emotional drain on this family. And this plate? It's just a symbol of that. It's old, it's broken, and it needs to be thrown out. Sarah gasped. Mark, stop it. You can't speak to her like that. Why not? Mark slammed his wine glass down. Ideally someone needs to say it, Sarah. She parades around here like she's the matriarch, but she's just a dependent. She's a burden. I work 60 hours a week to pay the mortgage on this house, to pay for the heat she uses, to pay for the food she eats. And she can't even show enough respect to use the dinnerware I bought? Well, she has to bring this dusty, cracked piece of junk to the table to remind us all of where she came from. Well, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of carrying dead weight. He grabbed the cracked plate from in front of me. My hand twitched. Mark, put it down. No, he said, standing up. He walked over to the trash can in the kitchen, which was open. This is where trash belongs. He dropped my grandmother's plate into the bin. It didn't shatter because it landed on a pile of paper napkins, but the disrespect was so violent, so absolute, that it felt like he had slapped me across the face. Sarah burst into tears. The kids looked terrified. Mark walked back to the table, dusted his hands off, and sat down. Now, he said, sliding one of his square, modern plates in front of me. Eat off that, and be grateful you have a roof over your head. If it wasn't for my generosity, you'd be on the street with that broken plate. He picked up his fork and started cutting his lamb, acting like he had just taught a toddler a valuable lesson. He thought he had won. He thought he had exerted his dominance and put me in my place. He thought I was going to sit there, cry into my napkin, and eat his charity food. But I didn't cry. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a sniper lining up the perfect shot. I looked at Sarah, who was sobbing quietly. I looked at my grandkids, who were watching me with big, fearful eyes. And then I looked at Mark. You think you're very generous, don't you, Mark? I asked softly. He didn't even look up from his food. I know I am. I pay for everything. I own everything. That's how the world works, Evelyn. He who holds the deed makes the rules. He who holds the deed, I repeated. That is an interesting rule. I reached down to my purse. I felt the cool, smooth surface of the manila folder. I pulled it out. It wasn't a thick folder, just a few pages stapled together, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. I cleared a space on the table, pushing aside the crystal gravy boat and the silver salt shakers. I placed the folder right in the center of the table, directly in Mark's line of sight. What is that? Mark asked, chewing his lamb, clearly annoyed that I was still talking. Your will. Because if you're leaving me that plate, I don't want it. No, Mark, I said, my voice loud and clear now. It's not my will. It's a receipt. You see, you keep talking about this house. Your mortgage. Your property. You talk about it so much I started to wonder if you actually ever read the paperwork when you and Sarah moved in. Mark stopped chewing. He looked at the folder, then at me. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. What are you talking about? Open it, I challenged him. Go ahead. Since you are the man of the house, since you are the provider, since you are the one carrying all the burden, surely you should know what is in that folder." The room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Mark hesitated. He sensed a trap, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, let out an arrogant sigh, and reached for the folder. I watched his fingers touch the paper. I watched him flip it open. I watched his eyes scan the first page. And then I watched the color drain from his face so fast it looked like his blood had evaporated. He didn't know that when Sarah and he were looking for a house 5 years ago, they couldn't qualify for the loan on this place. He didn't know that the down payment didn't come from a bank error or a lucky break. He didn't know that the actual title of the house wasn't held by the bank with his name on the mortgage. He froze. His mouth opened but no sound came out. "Read the name on the deed, Mark," I commanded. "Read it out loud so everyone at this table can hear who actually owns the chair you are sitting in." To understand the absolute earth-shattering silence that had just descended on that dining room, you have to understand the history of this house. You have to understand the last 5 years of my life, and the intricate web of lies and ego that Mark had spun around himself like a cocoon. While Mark is staring at that piece of paper trying to process the words that are rewriting his reality, let me take you back a bit. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters in this tragedy, because up until 10 seconds ago, Mark thought he was the director, the producer, and the star. Sarah, my daughter, sat to my right. If you looked at her, really looked at her, you could see the ghost of the girl she used to be. Sarah was always the kind of person who would apologize if you stepped on her foot. He has a heart so big it's dangerous. When she met Mark, she was dazzled. Mark can be charming when he wants something. In the beginning, he was all flowers and compliments. He made her feel safe. But over the years, that safety turned into a cage. I've watched my vibrant, laughing daughter turn into a woman who walks on eggshells in her own kitchen. She manages the kids, the cleaning, the cooking, and Mark's fragile ego, all while working a part-time job as a graphic designer that Mark refers to as her little hobby. Then there are the grandkids, Leo and Maya. Leo is 8, obsessed with dinosaurs and SpaceX. Maya is 5, and she thinks I'm a magical creature because I can pull quarters out of her ears. They are the reason I put up with Mark. They are the reason I moved into the drafty guest cottage at the back of the property. I wanted to be there to catch them when they fell, literally and metaphorically. Mark sees them as extensions of his legacy. I see them as little humans who need extra cookies and fewer lectures about efficiency. And finally, the setting, the house. Or as Mark calls it, the estate. It's a beautiful place, I won't deny that. A sprawling 2-story colonial with white pillars and a lawn that Mark manicures with the precision of a surgeon. He is obsessed with this house. It is his personality. When he meets new people, he doesn't say, "Hi, I'm Mark, I like jazz." He says, "Hi, I'm Mark, I just refinished the deck on my colonial." He treats the house like a museum. Shoes off at the door, coasters under every glass, no running in the hallways. He walks around touching the walls like he's checking for a pulse. But here is the funny thing about Mark's obsession. It was built on a foundation of denial. 5 years ago, when Sarah was pregnant with Leo, they were desperate to move out of their cramped apartment. They found this place. It was perfect. It was their dream home. But there was a problem. Mark's credit score was, to put it politely, in the toilet. He had made some bold investment moves in his 20s that didn't pan out, leaving him with a mountain of debt and a credit history that made banks laugh in his face. Sarah didn't have the income to qualify for a mortgage of this size on her own. They were going to lose the house. I remember the night Sarah came to my old apartment crying her eyes out. She was devastated. She had already picked out the nursery paint. She could see her future in those rooms, and it was slipping away because the bank said no. I couldn't stand to see her like that. My husband, God rest his soul, had been a paranoid saver. He didn't trust the stock market, he didn't trust fancy schemes. He trusted savings accounts and hard work. When he passed, he left me a significant life insurance policy and a nest egg that I had never touched. I lived simply. I clipped coupons. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. No one, especially not Mark, had any clue how much money I actually had sitting in the bank. So I made a decision. I decided to buy the house. But there was a catch. I knew Mark. Even back then, I knew his pride was as fragile as a soap bubble. If I had told him, "Here, let me buy this for you," he would have resented me forever. Or worse, he would have taken it for granted. So, I worked out a deal with their real estate attorney, an old friend of mine named Mr. Henderson. We set it up so that on paper, to Mark's eyes, it looked like a private lending agreement through a trust. Mark thought some anonymous investor had bridged the gap for them. He thought he was paying a mortgage to a faceless entity. In reality, the deed was purchased outright in cash in my name, Evelyn Miller. The mortgage payments he made every month, they went into a trust account that I set up for the grandkids' college fund. I wasn't taking a dime of his money for myself. I was just recycling it back to his children. I did it to save his ego. I did it so he could feel like a man providing for his family. I stayed silent when he bragged about closing the deal. I stayed silent when he told his friends how hard he negotiated the price. I stayed silent for 5 years. And how did he repay that silence? By treating me like the help. By moving me into the guest cottage, which by the way I also own, and acting like he was Mother Teresa. He constantly reminded me of the utility costs of having me there. He restricted when I could use the main kitchen. He once told me not to park my old Honda in the driveway when he had colleagues over because it ruined the curb appeal. It was a strange duality to live in. By day I was the poor, dependent mother-in-law shuffling around in her cardigan, being scolded for using too much hot water. But in reality I was the landlord. I was the bank. I was the only reason he wasn't living in a 2-bedroom rental on the other side of town. I watched him now, his eyes scanning the document. The document was a simple copy of the property deed, dated 5 years ago. At the top in bold official letters it read, Owner of record, Evelyn Marie Miller. The room was still frozen. Sarah was wiping her eyes, confused by the silence. She hadn't seen the paper yet. She just saw her husband turn into a statue. Mark. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. What is it? Is it legal trouble? Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. His brain was trying to reconfigure 5 years of arrogance into a new shape, and the pieces weren't fitting. He looked at the deed. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the deed again. I took a sip of my water. It was crisp and cold. It's not legal trouble, Sarah, I said, my voice calm and conversational, like we were discussing the weather. It's just a little clarification. Mark was just telling us all about how he owns everything. How he pays for the roof over my head. How he is the master of this domain. I just thought it was important to fact-check him. I pointed a manicured finger at the paper. Go ahead, Mark. Tell Sarah what it says. Tell her who owns your house. Mark stared at the paper, his face going through a spectrum of colors that I didn't know existed on human skin. Pale white, then a flushed, angry red, and finally a deep, bruised purple. He didn't read it out loud. Of course he didn't. That would be admitting defeat, and Mark would rather gargle broken glass than admit he was wrong. Instead, he slammed the folder shut, his hand trembling just slightly. This is fake, he hissed, looking around the table as if waiting for applause for his deduction. It's a prank. Very funny, Evelyn. You went to Kinko's and printed out a fake deed. Is this your idea of a Christmas joke? Trying to humiliate me in front of my family? He tossed the folder back toward me, but it slid off the table and landed on the floor, right next to his expensive Italian leather shoes. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It's not a joke, Mark, I said, keeping my voice level. And it's certainly not a fake. That is a certified copy from the county clerk's office. You can verify the seal number if you want. Sarah reached down and picked up the folder. Her hands were shaking too, but for a different reason. She was terrified. She was watching the 2 people she loved most in the world lock horns, and she knew that whatever happened in the next 5 minutes was going to change everything. She opened the folder and read the line I had pointed to. Mom, Sarah whispered, her eyes darting up to meet mine. It really says your name. Evelyn Miller. Date of purchase, 5 years ago. She looked at Mark, her brow furrowed in confusion. Mark, I don't understand. You said the trust handled the purchase. You said the investors were anonymous. They were. Mark barked, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. The loud bang made little Maya start to cry. Don't you get it, Sarah? He's lying. She's manipulated the paperwork somehow. She's trying to steal our house. Steal your house? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Mark, I bought this house. $450,000. I sat in Mr. Henderson's office, I signed the checks, and I saved you from being rejected by yet another bank. You didn't have the credit, remember? You didn't have the down payment. You were going to lose this place before you even set foot in it. I paid the mortgage. Mark roared. He was pacing now, walking back and forth behind his chair like a caged tiger. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisted with rage. Every single month for 5 years, I have written a check for $2,500. I paid for this roof. I paid for these walls. I paid for the heat you're using right now. So don't sit there with your smug face and tell me you own this place. I bought it with my sweat. This was the layered conflict I knew was coming. The money. In Mark's mind, money equaled ownership. He had written checks, therefore he was the king. He couldn't comprehend a world where his money hadn't bought him the power he craved. You made payments, I corrected him gently. That is true. But you didn't pay a mortgage company. You paid the Miller Trust. Did you ever wonder why the bank never called you? Why you never got a property tax bill? Why the insurance was always magically handled? Because I have an accountant who handles it. Mark yelled, though his voice cracked. He was lying. We both knew he did his own taxes on TurboTax to save money. He was flailing. You are a burden, he screamed, pivoting back to his favorite insult because he was losing the factual argument. He needed to make this emotional. He needed to make me the villain. You are a parasitic, useless old woman. You manipulated us. You set this up to what? To control us? To hold it over my head. This is sick, Evelyn. This is mentally sick behavior. You let me believe I own this house so you could pull the rug out whenever you felt like it? You're not a savior. You're a monster. Sarah stood up now, slamming her hand on the table. Stop it, Mark. Stop screaming. No, I won't stop. Mark wheeled on her. Your mother is a con artist. She's sitting there claiming she owns my house. My house. The house I built a deck for. The house I landscaped. She's trying to emasculate me, Sarah. Can't you see that? She's jealous of our success. She's jealous that I'm the head of this household, so she concocted this insanity to feel important. He looked at me with pure venom. You are useless, Evelyn. You contribute nothing. You live in the back like a stray cat I was nice enough to feed. And this is how you repay me? By forging documents? I should call the police. I should have you evicted right now. Evicted. I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. Yes. Evicted. Mark laughed, a manic, breathless sound. Get out. I don't care what that paper says. I want you off my property. Tonight. Pack your trash and take that broken plate out of the garbage on your way out and get off my land. The tension in the room was suffocating. The air felt electric, like right before a lightning strike. Maya was sobbing into Leo's shoulder, and Leo was looking at his father like he was a stranger. Mark wasn't just angry, he was unhinged. His reality was fracturing and he was trying to hold it together with rage. He thought he had played the ultimate card. He thought threatening to kick an old woman out on Christmas would scare me into submission. He thought I would apologize, tear up the fake deed and beg for his forgiveness just to keep my warm bed in the cottage. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that I wasn't just the owner of the house. I was the grandmother of his children. And he had just terrified them. I slowly stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table. I just stood up, smoothed my skirt and looked him dead in the eye. You want to talk about payments, Mark? I asked quietly. You want to talk about where your $2,500 a month went? I don't care where it went, he spat. It came out of my account. It went to a trust, I said, my voice hardening. But do you know who the beneficiaries of that trust are? Mark paused. His mouth hung open slightly. The wind was taken out of his sails just a fraction. What? The money, I said, stepping closer to the table. You kept saying I was a burden. You kept saying I was draining your resources. But Mark, I haven't spent a single penny of your money. Not 1 cent. Every check you wrote. Where do you think it is right now? He blinked. The anger was momentarily replaced by confusion. You stole it? No, I said. I saved it. This was the secondary challenge. He couldn't process that I wasn't the villain he wanted me to be. He wanted me to be a thief so he could be the victim. But I wasn't a thief. I was something much worse for a man like him. I was the one in control. But that's not the point right now, I continued, cutting off his next outburst. The point is, you just tried to evict the legal owner of this property on Christmas Day. You just called the woman who raised your wife a parasite, In front of your children. You just threw a family heirloom in the trash because it wasn't pretty enough for you. I walked over to the kitchen trash can. The room went silent again. I reached in and pulled out my grandmother's plate. I wiped a smear of gravy off the rim with my thumb. You think this is broken, Mark? I held the plate up. This plate has survived wars. It has survived poverty. It has survived moving across oceans. It is stronger than you will ever be. I walked back to the table and looked at Sarah. She was crying silent tears now, looking back and forth between her husband and her mother. She was realizing that the neutrality she had tried to maintain was no longer an option. She had to choose. Mark, Sarah said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. If Mom owns the house, then you can't kick her out. Whose side are you on? Mark turned on her, his eyes wide with betrayal. She is lying to us. She is humiliating me. She's not lying, Mark, Sarah said, pointing to the deed. I know her signature. And I know Mr. Henderson. This is real. Mark looked at Sarah, then at me, then at the deed. The walls were closing in. The narrative he had built, that he was the benevolent king and I was the peasant, was collapsing. And when a narcissist's world collapses, they don't apologize. They double down. Fine, Mark sneered, buttoning his suit jacket as if preparing for a business meeting. If this house is yours, Evelyn, then I'm leaving. I'm not living under the roof of a liar. I'm taking my family and we are going to a hotel. Come on, Sarah. Kids, let's go. He marched toward the door, expecting them to follow. He expected the flock to follow the shepherd. But nobody moved. The sound of the front door latch clicking open was loud, but the silence that followed it was deafening. Mark was standing there, one hand on the brass doorknob, his chest heaving, waiting for the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. He was waiting for the shuffle of feet. He was waiting for the frantic apology from Sarah. I'm sorry, Mark, let's go, you're right. He was waiting for the obedience he had cultivated for 5 years. But the chairs didn't move. The feet didn't shuffle. I watched Sarah. I watched her hands, which were resting on the table, clenched into tight fists. Her knuckles were white. She was staring down at her plate, the square modern plate Mark had forced her to buy, and she was breathing hard. It was a battle of wills happening in real time right there in the dining room. The useless mother-in-law and the benevolent dictator were the spectators, but Sarah was the one in the arena. Sarah, Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to layer menace over his command. I said, let's go. I am not going to stand here and be disrespected in a house that we, have been lied to about. Get the kids' coats. Leo looked at his dad, then at his mom. Mom, are we leaving? I haven't finished my potatoes. That innocent comment from an 8-year-old was the catalyst. It broke the spell. Sarah looked up. Her eyes weren't wet anymore. They were dry and they were hard. She looked at Mark standing in the doorway, the cold winter air rushing in behind him, chilling the room. Then she looked at me, sitting there with my grandmother's rescued plate. No, Sarah said. It was a small word. Just 2 letters. But in that room it sounded like a cannon blast. Mark blinked as if he hadn't heard her correctly. Excuse me. I said no, Mark, Sarah repeated, her voice gaining volume. She didn't stand up. She didn't scream. She just stayed seated, rooting herself to the spot. We are not leaving. It is Christmas. The children are eating. And we are in my mother's house. If anyone is leaving, it's you. I felt a lump form in my throat. In 5 years I had never heard her defy him. Not once. She had always bent, always compromised, always smoothed things over to keep his fragile ego intact. But tonight, the cracks in the plate had revealed the cracks in their marriage, and she was finally looking through them. Mark let go of the doorknob. He walked slowly back toward the table, his face twisted into a mask of disbelief and fury. You're choosing her? He hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You're choosing the woman who lied to us for 5 years? The woman who sat back and watched me pay a mortgage on a house she owned? Sarah, think about what you're doing. She stole from us. She scammed us. That money I paid every month, that was for our equity. She pocketed it. I didn't pocket a dime, Mark, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his tirade like a knife. Mark spun on me. Oh, shut up, Evelyn. You're a liar. You took my $2,500 every month and probably stuffed it in a mattress or spent it on whatever useless old women spend money on. That was my money. That was my sweat. You stole my future. Sit down, Mark, I said. I didn't ask him. I ordered him. I will not sit. Sit down. I slammed my hand on the table. The silver cutlery jumped. If you want to talk about your money, you will sit down and listen to where it went. Because if you walk out that door right now without knowing, you are going to feel like an even bigger fool than you look right now. Mark hesitated. Greed is a powerful motivator, almost as powerful as pride. He wanted to know about the money. He wanted ammunition. He wanted proof of my theft so he could feel righteous again. He pulled his chair back out and sat down, crossing his arms aggressively. Fine, he spat. Tell me, where is my $150,000? I reached into the manila folder again. Underneath the deed there was a second document. A bank statement. I slid it across the table, past the gravy boat, past the centerpiece, right to him. It's not your $150,000, Mark, I said calmly. And it's not mine either. He snatched the paper up. I watched his eyes scan the lines. I knew exactly what he was seeing. He was seeing a statement for an irrevocable trust account. The Miller Grandchildren Trust. What is this? He muttered. Simple math, I explained, leaning forward. $2,500 a month. 60 months. Plus a significant initial deposit I made when I opened it, plus 5 years of compound interest in a high-yield index fund. Look at the bottom line, Mark. Read the total. Mark's eyes widened. He swallowed hard. $210,000. $210,000, I confirmed. Every check you wrote. Every mortgage payment you stressed about. I didn't touch it. I didn't use it to buy bingo tickets or fix my car. I deposited it directly into that account. It is legally locked for Leo and Maya. It is their college fund. It is their down payment on their first homes. It is their future. I looked at Sarah. She was covering her mouth with her hand, tears welling up again, but these were different tears. These were tears of relief. Tears of realization. I did it, I continued, keeping my eyes on Mark, because I knew you couldn't save money, Mark. I watched you buy that luxury car when you couldn't afford the house. I watched you buy designer suits on credit. I knew that if I didn't force you to pay a mortgage, you would have spent that money on yourself. You would have squandered your children's future on your own image. So I became the bank. I became the burden. I let you call me useless. I let you mock my cracked plate. I let you treat me like a squatter. And all the while I was building a safety net for your children that you never would have built yourself. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of total defeat. Mark held the paper, his hands trembling. He had just been stripped of every single weapon he had. He couldn't claim I was a burden. I was the provider. He couldn't claim I was a thief. I was the ultimate saver. He couldn't claim ownership of the house. The deed was on the table. But a man like Mark doesn't accept defeat gracefully. When the logic fails, they turn to entitlement. He looked up from the bank statement and a nasty, desperate look crossed his face. Well, he said, a sneer creeping back onto his lips. That's great. Really. But that's still my money. I earned it. If the house is yours, fine. Keep this old drafty museum. But that cash. That's marital assets. That came from my salary. I want access to that account. If we're moving out, I'm going to need that cash for a down payment on a new place. A better place. Sarah gasped. Mark. That's for the kids. Did you not hear her? It's for Leo and Maya. I'm their father. Mark shouted, slamming the bank statement down. I decide what's best for them. And what's best is that we get away from this crazy woman and buy our own house. Evelyn, sign over control of that trust to me. No. Or I swear to God I will sue you for fraud. You collected rent under false pretenses. False pretenses? I laughed. It was a dry, humorless laugh. Mark, you are the king of false pretenses. You've been walking around acting like a millionaire while living in my house and driving a leased car. And now you want to raid your children's piggy bank because your ego is bruised. It is my money. Mark roared, standing up again. He was losing control completely now. The facade of the polished businessman was gone. He was just a greedy child throwing a tantrum. I want it. I earned it. You have no right to lock it away. He reached for the folder again as if physically taking the paper would give him the money. But Sarah was faster. Sarah stood up. She grabbed the folder and pulled it to her chest. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years she didn't see the man she fell in love with. She saw a stranger. She saw a man who would throw his mother-in-law on the street on Christmas. She saw a man who cared more about a bank balance than his children's future. She saw a man who had called her mother useless, while she was secretly securing their lives. "No," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. "You aren't touching this money, Mark. And you aren't suing anyone." "Oh, really?" Mark stepped toward her, invading her personal space, using his height to intimidate her. "And who is going to stop me?" You don't have a spine, Sarah. You never have. You'll do what I say because you can't survive without me. You can't pay the bills without me." "She doesn't need to," I said, remaining seated but gripping my steak knife just a little tighter. "Because she's in her house. And she has a mother who actually has savings. You're the one who is broke, Mark. You're the one with the bad credit. You're the one who needs this marriage to maintain your lifestyle. Sarah owns a graphic design business she's been terrified to grow because you made fun of it. Sarah has a home. Sarah has a mother." I looked him up and down. "You, on the other hand, you have a leased BMW and a lot of bluster." Mark looked at me, then back at Sarah. "Sarah, give me the folder. Go. Don't let her poison you. We are a team, remember? You and me against the world." "It was never us against the world, Mark," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "It was you against everyone. Including me. Including Mom." She took a deep breath, and I saw the moment the decision was made. It was like watching a steel door slam shut. "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly. "The kids aren't going anywhere. We are staying here. In my mom's house. If you want to leave, if you want to go to a hotel, then go. But you are going alone." Mark froze. The ultimate threat, withdrawal of affection, withdrawal of the family unit, had been played, but not by him. It had been played on him. He looked around the room. The beautifully set table. The roast lamb. The Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. The family he thought he owned. And the cracked plate sitting proudly at my place setting. "You can't be serious," Mark whispered. "You're kicking me out? On Christmas?" "I'm not kicking you out," Sarah said, her voice breaking but resolute. "I'm just not following you anymore. You tried to kick Mom out. You tried to throw her away like trash. I'm just staying where I belong. With the people who actually value me." Mark stood there for a long, agonizing moment. His chest was heaving. His face was a mask of humiliation. He looked at the kids. Leo was looking down at his plate. Maya was hiding her face in Sarah's sweater. No one was looking at him with admiration anymore. No one was looking at him with fear. They were just looking at him with pity. And that was the one thing Mark couldn't handle. Pity. He sneered, a last-ditch attempt to save face. "Fine. Have it your way. Stay with your crazy mother. Stay in this dump. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize you can't function without a real man around." He turned on his heel. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't say goodbye to the kids. He just walked to the front door, yanked it open, and stepped out into the snow. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that shook the window panes. We all sat there in the silence for a moment. The sound of his car engine starting outside roared to life, then faded as he peeled out of the driveway, probably scratching the paint on his precious BMW. He was gone. I looked at Sarah. She was trembling, clutching the folder to her chest like a shield. The adrenaline was fading and the reality was setting in. Her marriage was likely over. Her life was about to change. But then she looked at me, and she smiled. It was a watery, sad smile, but it was real. "You really saved every penny?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Every penny," I promised. "Plus interest." I picked up my fork. I looked at my cracked plate. "Now," I said, my voice steady and warm. "The lamb is getting cold. And I believe Leo still needs to finish his potatoes." The silence in the house after Mark's BMW roared away was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, but in a good way, like a weighted blanket. It was the silence of safety. For the first time in 5 years, the air in the room didn't feel pressurized. I looked at the kids. Leo was still holding his fork, a piece of roast lamb halfway to his mouth. Maya had stopped crying and was wiping her nose on her sleeve. They looked at their mother, waiting for the cue on how to feel. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, The throne Mark had abdicated, and then she looked at me. She didn't fall apart. She didn't chase after him. She reached out, took the carving knife and sliced another piece of lamb. "Eat your dinner, guys," Sarah said, her voice sounding a little rusty but firm. "Grandma made it. It's delicious." We finished Christmas dinner. It was surreal. We didn't talk about Mark. We didn't talk about the trust fund or the deed or the screaming match. We talked about Maya's kindergarten play. We talked about Leo's soccer team. We ate the rosemary lamb and the roasted potatoes, and for dessert, we had the pecan pie I had baked in the guest oven. It was the best meal of my life. And I ate it off my cracked, chipped 80-year-old plate with more pride than if it had been made of solid gold. But as you all know, stories like this don't just end when the door slams. Real life has paperwork. Real life has fallout. And Mark wasn't the type of man to just walk away into the snowy night and learn his lesson. Narcissists don't learn, they litigate. 2 days later the text started. First they were apologetic. "I'm sorry, I lost my temper, let's talk." Then when Sarah didn't reply, they turned into the victim narrative. "How can you keep me from my children on Christmas week? You're brainwashed." And finally, when silence continued to meet his noise, the threats arrived. "I'm getting a lawyer. I'm taking half the house. I'm taking the trust fund. You'll be on the street." Sarah was terrified at first, but I told her to hold the line. I told her to trust the paper trail. 3 weeks later, we were sitting in a conference room at a law office downtown. It was me, Sarah, and my old friend Mr. Henderson, the attorney who had helped me set everything up years ago. On the other side of the mahogany table sat Mark and a lawyer who looked like he cost more per hour than Mark made in a week. Mark looked rough. His suit was wrinkled, he had dark circles under his eyes, and he was trying desperately to look like he was in charge, but his leg was bouncing nervously under the table. "My client," Mark's lawyer began, smoothing his tie, "is asserting his rights to equitable distribution. Regardless of the name on the deed, Mr. Thompson has contributed significantly to the appreciation of the property through maintenance and mortgage payments. Furthermore, he asserts that the funds in the so-called trust are marital assets derived from his income, and he is entitled to 50%. Mark crossed his arms and smirked at me. "You can't just hide money, Evelyn. A judge will see right through this." Sarah looked at me. She was nervous. This was the moment Mark had been banking on. He thought the legal system would validate his entitlement. He thought that because he was the man of the house, the laws of finance would bend to his will. I reached into my purse. It was the same purse I had at Christmas dinner. Mark flinched. He had developed a Pavlovian fear of my handbag. "Mr. Henderson," I said, nodding to my attorney, "would you please show the opposing counsel Exhibit C?" Mr. Henderson slid a document across the table. It wasn't the deed. It wasn't the bank statement. It was a document Mark had signed 5 years ago on the day they moved in. "What is this?" Mark's lawyer asked, picking it up. "That," I said, "is a standard residential lease agreement. Clause 4, Section B." Mark squinted at the paper. "I never signed a lease. I signed loan documents." "You signed a stack of papers, Mark," I reminded him. "You were so excited to brag about closing the deal that you didn't read what you were signing. You signed a document acknowledging that the property was owned solely by the Evelyn Miller Trust, and that you were a tenant. Furthermore, you signed a waiver of equity interest. It states clearly that any and all payments made are strictly for rent and utility reimbursement, and grant no ownership stake in the property." Mark's lawyer went pale. He read the clause. Then he read it again. He looked at Mark. "Did you read this before you signed it?" I thought it was just bank formalities." Mark stammered. "She tricked me." "No trick," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "It is a notarized document. You have been a tenant for 5 years, Mr. Thompson. And in this state, tenants do not accrue equity in their landlord's property, no matter how nicely they mow the lawn." "And the money?" Mark demanded, his voice rising to a squeak. "The 200,000. That's my salary." "Rent," I corrected him. "Legally you paid rent. Once you pay rent, that money belongs to the landlord. I, as the landlord, chose to gift that income to a trust for my grandchildren. That is my money to do with as I please. You have no claim to it." The silence in the conference room was even better than the silence at Christmas. It was the sound of a bully realizing he had punched a brick wall. Mark had nothing. He had no house. He had no savings because he had spent his actual disposable income on cars and suits. He had no claim to the college fund. He was walking away with exactly what he deserved. His ego and his debt. But then came the final condition. The twist that I hadn't even told Sarah about until that moment. Mark slumped in his chair, defeated. So that's it? I'm homeless. I'm broke. Not quite, I said. I have one final offer. A condition. Everyone looked at me. I am willing to give you a check today, I said. For $10,000. From my own personal savings. Enough to get an apartment, put a deposit down and start over. Mark's eyes lit up. He sat up straighter. The greed was still there, swimming just below the surface of his despair. 10,000. But, I raised a finger, there is a condition. You sign the divorce papers today. Uncontested. You agree to the custody arrangement Sarah has proposed. Weekends only, no interference in her parenting decisions. And most importantly, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. You never talk about this family, you never talk about this house, and you never, ever call me or my daughter useless, again. If you violate any of these terms, the $10,000 becomes a loan with 20% interest, payable immediately. Mark looked at the check I had placed on the table. Then he looked at Sarah. He didn't look at her with love. He didn't look at her with regret. He looked at her as an obstacle that had finally been removed. Give me the pen, Mark said. He didn't even hesitate. He sold his fight for 10 grand. He signed the papers, took the check and walked out of that office without looking back. Sarah watched him go. I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She let out a long, slow exhale, like she had been holding her breath for 5 years. She turned to me, and for the first time I saw the daughter I had raised. Not the timid mouse Mark had created, but the strong, capable woman who had been hiding underneath. He really didn't care, Sarah whispered. He took the money. He's a cheap man, Sarah, I said, squeezing her hand. We just got him at a discount. Life is different now. The energy in the big colonial house has changed completely. We repainted the hallway. Mark hated yellow, so we painted it the brightest, sunniest yellow we could find. Sarah has taken over the main office for her graphic design business, and she is crushing it. She has clients lining up, and she doesn't have a husband hovering over her shoulder telling her it's a cute hobby. As for the trust fund, it's growing. Leo wants to go to space camp this summer, and thanks to his rent, he can. Maya is taking piano lessons. And the plate? The cracked, chipped floral plate that started it all? It's not in the cupboard. I had it framed. It hangs right in the dining room, directly across from the head of the table. It's a reminder. A reminder that broken things aren't trash. A reminder that value isn't about being perfect or shiny or expensive. It's about history. It's about resilience. And it's about the strength to hold on when someone tries to throw you away. Mark thought I was useless. He thought I was just an old woman with a cracked plate. He didn't know that the plate was the only thing holding his entire charade together. He broke the plate and the whole world shattered. But we didn't shatter. We just swept up the pieces and built something better. So, to everyone out there listening, check your paperwork. Know your worth. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are a burden in your own life. If you enjoyed this story and you want to see more karma served on a silver platter, or a cracked one, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And hey, drop a comment below. What is the one object in your house that you would never, ever throw away no matter what anyone said? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.